prefer to start talking about the second agenda item. So I should also mention here that Senator Przanski, chair of the Grant Review Committee, is unexpectedly unable to join us today. He's asked that I kind of lead this meeting. And so I will go ahead and open the record to see if there's any public comment to be provided. I'm not hearing or seeing any. So in which case, it is my pleasure to introduce Catherine Talon, who will kind of guide a discussion of the Justice Reinvestment Grant Review Committee about our baseline and some potential changes that we're thinking through. Catherine?
All right, thanks, Ian. For the record, my name is Catherine Talon. I'm a research analyst here, and I often walk through a lot of data slides when we're looking at assessing counties' prison usage in particular. And so we'll give Ian a second to pull up the slides, but we are taking a look right now at improving our baseline. It is a little bit outdated, maybe more than a little bit outdated. And we are going through and asking all the different groups of people who use our baseline and our JRP dashboard in general, what could be improved there. And we are going to start with you all. There's a long list of people, as you can see here, some of them are grayed out, that use our JRP dashboards. Grant Review Committee, of course, the Commission. We as CJC staff use it internally a lot, but it's also helpful to LIP6, county staff, advocates, and members of the public. You all are the first group that we're asking for feedback. And the group I think that we as staff most often discuss this baseline and dashboard data with. So we are really looking forward to hearing your feedback and just some of the things that you maybe like and don't like about the baseline and the dashboard in general. Okay, so just a couple of things I want to walk through before we jump into looking at the data slides themselves. As an overall reminder, purpose of the Justice Reinvestment Program, a piece of that, a really important piece of that, is to reduce prison usage while protecting public safety and holding individuals accountable. So we have a whole slew of information on the dashboard, and really that's what we designed it to do, is to help you all, in particular, the GRC, assess counties for their prison use reduction. So it should contain information that helps you, us, and the Commission evaluate prison usage, not information that hinders us. All right, and to get really specific with that, one of the review and evaluation criteria from statute is that the Grant Review Committee and the Commission have to evaluate the extent to which the applicant's county has historically reduced prison usage, of course, by individuals convicted of JRI eligible crimes. So while the GRC and Commission must assess historical reduction, there's no specific time frame set for that historical reduction. So that's where staff have been really focusing our efforts to improve and update the baseline and make it more relevant and make it more usable moving forward through time. Okay, so just a couple of points here. We have spent a lot of time looking at some of the limitations, and I think that you all have felt those as well as we do some of our evaluations. There are some limitations of the current prison usage baseline, and really the biggest thing is that it's static. It was created when the program started, and it hasn't changed since. And there have been so many things that have affected the programs and affected the criminal justice system in general since then. I mean, specifically, these data are from 2012 to 2015. It's a decade-old baseline. The population has grown quite a bit and in different ways for different counties. So that's affected different parts of the state differently. And then, of course, there have been lots of policy changes since the baseline was created. All right, first data slide. So having discussed some of that context, let's look at what the baseline looks like here. This should look super familiar to you all. This is just an anonymized county that we grabbed because it gives a pretty good example of some of the potential drawbacks of the baseline. The baseline here and for every county is the average annual prison use in months for that county from 2012 to 2015. And it's compared to the 1-year rolling sum of prison use from that time moving forward. We, of course, have the two different elements of our prison use measure, which are sentence length and number of intakes on the right-hand side. And then I think the main thing we want to note on this page is that for this particular county, as we view it, it appears to have very low prison use compared to its overall baseline. So we'll come right back to this in a couple of slides, but first we want to look at some population growth. All right, so this is just a plot for every single county in the state of the percent change in population between 2012 and 2022. So we have some counties that have seen almost no population growth at all in a very long period of time, and some that have seen sort of an explosion in population growth. And this is affecting different counties differently. And our main baseline and our main prison use measure do not incorporate any population data. All right, so this piece of the dashboard that's in existence right now, and we look at this a lot of the time because we know that population information is important, but it isn't in our baseline. We look at this prison use over time per capita for every county. And so for this particular county, this is showing the same county as the main prison use plot we just looked at. This county is in red, the statewide is always in black, and then it's compared to its peer group. So this particular county, at the time the baseline was made, from about 2012 to 2015, had very high prison use per capita compared to the statewide rate and compared to their peers. Since then, from about 2018 to 2022, they're still above their statewide rate and above their peers. However, much lower than they were initially when the baseline was created. So then if we take a look back at the overall prison use plot, yeah, perfect, thank you. This is a lot of the reason why they look like they're doing so well at this point in time, right? So compared to their baseline, which was established when they had very high per capita prison use compared to the rest of the state, they're looking like they have very low prison use right now. And I'm just going to kind of, I'm going to kind of sit here. So that's sort of the overview of why this baseline is a little bit outdated and sometimes isn't the most helpful when looking at what might actually be a good historical comparison. This isn't true for every county, but there are a few that are like this, and there are certainly some challenges to creating a brand new baseline, but we're open to ideas. So I think my main question here is, are there things you really like about this baseline as it exists right now? Are there things you definitely don't like about it? Any suggestions you have for us to consider while we're working through what might be a good updated baseline measure? Just going to open it to sort of comments, questions for a few minutes here. I know this is all really fast to sort of run through this and ask for comments. So I have a couple of prepared specific questions too. Yes, please.
So, is there a way to weight the prison usage by population growth or by change so that it doesn't look particularly or over good just because of that rapid population growth? I mean, statistically, there should be a way to do that.
Yep, there are definitely ways for us to do that. Yes. Well, like I said, we're currently working on this. So what we're going to do is we're gonna note all of your ideas and suggestions, and it's a little hard maybe on the fly to come up with what that exactly that would look
Oh,
like, but we
no.
definitely agree. No, but we definitely agree that's something we would like to play a part in the update for sure.
Catherine,
Yes,
if I might.
of course.
So I got two things. The first being, I've already brought this up before, but the intent of justice reinvestment programming back in 2013 when we first started it, right, was to reduce or at least prevent the construction of, I think it was Junction City at the time, right? Because we
Mhm.
were in an upward trajectory of prison utilization across the state. And we, as a state, curbed that downward significantly, right? And we're able to prevent the building of I think multiple prisons, one of Junction City, and then there was also talk of expansion for the female prison population. And and I feel like at least as a state for the state of Oregon, we've really done some strong work with justice reinvestment. In fact, not only did we prevent the building of two prisons, but we also eliminated the need for two prisons. So a net result of, you know, four prisons that we have essentially prevented for having to use in the state of Oregon. I am a little bit concerned of plateauing as it relates to the baseline. So if we were on an upward trajectory in 2013, we're down for the past, let's say, 10 years-ish. I'm worried that we're just going to continue to plateau and be penalized for that. Because the pandemic had such a significant impact on the justice system in 2020 and 2021. I don't know that we have a very clear picture of what our prison utilization might be post pandemic, and that's just a concern that I have as it relates to the plateauing of prison utilization. The other thing that I'm a bit concerned about is House Bill 4002 and the impacts that it might have for people that are on supervision, especially for those that are on downward dispositional departures, and the activity that the police might have and the role that the police might have moving forward, because it's not just people that will be jammed up for PCS cases, but and the appropriate response for deflection, but there will likely be some additional cases that come through based off of probable cause to search and find other potential nefarious activity that's happening within our communities. And the reason I'm elevating that is because people that are on downward dispositional departure that get a new crime, let's say, um, our industry within community corrections, a lot of them will feel obligated to make a recommendation to the courts to revoke that conditional or that downward dispositional departure, thereby increasing our prison utilization. So some of those things that I'm mentioning, the plateauing effect, and also the reform of ballot measure 110 through House Bill 4002, I'd hate to see some of our community partners, including community corrections, be penalized based off of those two things. So anyway, for what it's worth, I'm not exactly sure on a solution with that, but just to talk about it, and I'm sure you all are talking about it internally.
Thank you. All right. Well, I have one more short thing to talk about here, and that is I think I'll sort of float the idea that we've been talking about for this particular piece. And uh, I have a whole second section of sort of my part here that I think we're gonna pause and then move on to that after we go through some of the supplemental round action items. But really quickly before we leave this, one idea that we as staff have thought about is taking this 3-year average baseline, and instead of it being a static baseline based on one period of time, making it a sort of a rolling figure. So a rolling 30, keeping the same 36 months, but basing it on basically the current month as an anchor, right? And it might look back 36 months, it might look back 4 or 5 years, it maybe so we're just thinking about like the idea of one that rolls with time, but is the same measure, so that things like the pandemic and policy changes, while they do affect it for a period of time, they do also roll out of that baseline at some point. So while those possible effects are sort of acting on the system and acting on counties, it's incorporated in their baseline. But after that, it rolls forward with time, but incorporates enough time that we can really keep that or meet that historical prison use requirement for evaluation. So I kind of wanted to throw that out there and see what folks think about that as a concept, as well as what time frame would seem appropriate. We've thought about, because we have this existing sort of 3-year average baseline, trying to keep that amount of time, or looking at the funding cycle and trying to capture either 1 or 2 funding cycles and have that roll through time. Are there any sort of initial thoughts on that as a substitute? And the reason I mentioned I have a second half of this is because while that doesn't incorporate sort of population data, there are other pieces of the dashboard that do discuss population that we're thinking about making some changes and updates to as well. And that I'll talk about that a little bit later in the second half of the presentation. So this rolling piece wouldn't necessarily incorporate that, but it would address at least the static nature of the baseline that this sits.
I think the rolling baseline might make it a little bit more likely that to see that plateauing effect that Nate's talking about. And so I guess it's just a matter of how the data are looked at, because as you can see in this particular instance, there was a huge change in 2016, but of course, the change was much more gradual thereafter. And so I think we've made the biggest gains. We can still make more gains, but so that's a policy question, though.
Yeah, and I think one thing I want to point out, and this is true of the baseline now, but whatever the baseline is, or whatever it becomes, it is not intended to be determinative, right? So it's intended to tell some of the story and help sort of frame that comparison, but ultimately the GRC and the commission, no matter what the baseline is, have to take into consideration sort of county context and system-wide context in making your thorough evaluation of each of the counties. So yes, I see what your concern is there, certainly, that could exacerbate that potential plateau issue if we're just incorporating the last 3 years or so in the baseline. I can see where that could have an effect.
So Catherine, is the expectation to continue to reduce prison utilization across the board for justice reinvestment programming?
I'm going to kick that one over to Ian, I think. I guess I have one piece I want to talk about. That is that we do not currently look at prison capacity as a piece of any of our tools in the dashboard, but that is something we're considering starting to take under or pull into some of our measures, because when we did close a couple of prisons, that really did change the relationship between the amount of people we have in prison right now and the capacity we have. And we're not really in the same situation we were in 2 to 3 years ago, as far as capacity. So maybe I'm gonna pass that to Ian ultimately.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Nate. It's an excellent question. As spelled out in statute and rule, which of course could change, the legislature could come in and make different decisions, give us as an executive agency different direction. But right now it has us consider the historical prison usage, which, as Catherine kind of has laid out, could mean any number of timeframes, right? And then it's a direction to reduce prison usage. Again, no timeframe. And so I guess to your question, the historical context of this is that the legislature was keen to not open Junction City. Obviously, that is, at least as of presently, we have delayed that at least 10 years according to the most recent projection. However, the legislature will likely be looking at having to reopen different wings of Deer Ridge, which may, bring about some thoughts from the legislature. And so I think to a certain extent, the Justice Reinvestment Program is at a bit of a crossroads of where it goes forward. That being said, we are not expecting every county to continue at pace of a 5% reduction. There are other states that have structured their justice reinvestment initiatives to where you've reduced prison usage at a cadence of 5%, or else you don't get funding. Oregon has never structured it that way. Oregon, I think, as a testament to the work you all do at the Grant Review Committee, you have been inclined to work with counties as opposed to simply draw red lines and then cut off funding. There's, of course, policymakers have influence in this, yourselves included, at the Grant Review Committee level, the commission level, and then certainly the legislative and then gubernatorial level. So that was a long way of saying it depends, I suppose.
Yeah, that's really helpful for context for me. If going through those conversations, if the expectation is to continue to see a decline in the prison utilization, I would just advocate for additional funding through the Justice Reinvestment Programming. And the reason is that if we continue to have people stay in our local communities that would have been going to prison, there's a significant strain on our resources, in particular, the justice system, the local justice system, jails and the district attorney's office, community corrections, and all of the like. And I would just encourage whoever it is that's making those decisions and requiring us to continue to see a prison utilization decline, that we reinvest that money back into the local communities. So thank you for that that clarification, Ian. It sounds like there's more to come with it.
All right. Well, like I said, I have a second half of my presentation, but we'll get to that later. So I'm going to hand it back over to Ian.
Perfect. Thank you, Catherine. So we now have quorum present. And so I guess for the record, Ian Davidson, Justice Reinvestment Program Manager. While we still have quorum, we're going to talk about the 12 supplemental funding applications, which you all should have received and had a chance to review. To set the stage maybe a little beforehand, this supplemental funding, as you all may recall, is funding derived from 3 counties opting not to apply for justice reinvestment funding in this biennium. So not a huge amount of money, but the commission directed us CJC staff to create a competitive supplemental funding round, which is what we did. They directed or created a focus, which you'll see written here, which is a focus on restoring programs, and I'm now reading, or associated components currently not funded that were funded by or requested from the JRP in this biennium or past biennia. This could include restoring or expanding components that promote the existing operation of JRP funded programs. So all of the 12 applications which you've received reflect that focus to one degree or another. But that was the commission directed focus for these funds. In terms of a maybe high level overview, so I mentioned that there's not a ton of money. There's less than $800,000 available for program funding. There's a different set amount of money for victim services. For our purposes today, we won't touch on that. So the magical number to think about is 784 or $784,000. And then we as staff will work with the counties to ensure that the victim services funding is directed appropriately, scaled to the amount each county's award is. So it'll be 10% of whatever their award happens to be at the end of this. The commission indicated that there would be a ceiling of $10,000 or $100,000. So a county could not receive more than $100,000, and that would be the maximum request allowed. And then the commission also asked for each county to submit contingency funding requests. So each county submitted 3 budgets: a budget with a cap or a maximum of 100,000, a maximum of 75,000, and then a last of 50,000. And so this was in an attempt to allow counties to prioritize, to one extent or another, their preferences if they are not able to get their full funding request. As for those of you who have participated in competitive funding rounds with us in the past, this is an attempt for us as CJC staff to get a better sense of the preferences of different counties as it relates to funding. Now, of the counties that applied, there were 12 of them. The total funding requests, if we were to sum them up, and taking into account that there were a few budgets that were above the allowable amounts, but adjusting for that, so a maximum of 100,000 for each county, the total amounts were $1,181,000. Obviously, that exceeds the available funding. We're looking at just shy of $400,000 in excess. So there is a funding shortfall of $400,000 if you were to approve every single request. So I'll pause there before we get to the actual counties and see if there's any questions about the supplemental funding or the process or your task here today. Okay. So with these counties, I'm just going to go through them alphabetically. First up is Clackamas County. So they're requesting funding for Oregon Solutions, which is a consultant contract. Clackamas County, utilizing some justice reinvestment funding, has contracted with Oregon Solutions for several years now. They've helped them with a justice reinvestment initiative roadmap and action plan, which they've been working on. They're now, if I remember correctly, on phase 3 of it. So they intend to continue that work. They have found it beneficial. And actually, one of the recommendations from their most recent phase is to hire a more time from a coordinator to staff the local public safety coordinating council. And so they're looking for startup funds here that will hopefully provide a runway for them to then be able to more completely and more perpetually, that's not a word, into the future, that they could fund a LipSig coordinator. So, and I'll say here that if you have any questions about these applications, please interrupt me. I'll go through these rather quickly unless you have questions. Next up is Clatsop County. Their request, the bulk of it is these first 2 bullet points, which is in a couple or part of the time of 2 enforcement deputies and part of the time of an enforcement sergeant. You may recall in their competitive ask, they asked for a behavioral health deputy. Ultimately, that position was not funded. This is a response to that. And so instead of having a dedicated behavioral health deputy, they intend to train, which you see here, crisis intervention training, Oregon Opioid Conference, some existing deputies to serve many of the roles of that position that would have otherwise been funded. And so they've indicated that these enforcement deputies and then the enforcement sergeant, they're part of the downward departure program team. And their role is to locate and re-engage clients in downward departure programs and services. And then, of course, the enforcement sergeant will supervise those deputies and then track key performance measures. And then Narcan supplies would be a part of their downward departure program, working with different clients, the CIT training I mentioned before, as well as the opioid conference, and then they're requesting some administrative costs to allow them to support this program. Columbia County is next. They are requesting funding for EMDR training, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing training. This is, they intend to send 3 individuals to training to be trained on EMDR. This is a treatment that is targeted at individuals with trauma. I will make a note on EMDR here that the American Psychological Association conditionally recommends this treatment, and they strongly recommend different kinds of cognitive behavioral therapy for the treatment of trauma and PTSD. Columbia County does provide cognitive behavioral therapy to their clients, so this would be in addition, not supplanting. And then they're requesting, similar to Clatsop County, funding of a sheriff's deputy, which was requested in their competitive grant application, but was not funded. And serves a very similar role of working with clients who are in the community and keeping tabs and re-engaging with clients. Next up is Deschutes County. They're requesting funding for an administrative analyst, which could, for those of us who may not be familiar with Deschutes County, could be better interpreted as a housing subject matter expert. In Deschutes County, including through much of Central Oregon and candidly the whole state, housing is a significant barrier for justice-involved individuals. In Deschutes County, they have a position based in the county that helps clients connect with open housing beds. And so the county, using Justice Reinvestment funds and other funds, has several bed openings. Being able to keep track of all of them when they open, the clients that need housing, is a responsibility that falls to an individual. And so they're requesting a portion of their funds to go towards that administrative analyst position. They're also requesting funds for client support services. As they note in their application, offering this resource allows female clients on supervision to be matched with a support system that comprehends their unique challenges and facilitates access to tailored resources and encouragement. So this particular tranche of funding would go towards a gender-specific support services. It would work with female clients. Jackson County, they're requesting funding for a couple PO positions, so parole and probation officers, for a 6-month period. They've requested funding for 24 months in their competitive grant application. They were ultimately awarded 18 months. They're requesting a backfilling of those last 6 months with the supplemental funding request. Josephine County, they're requesting funding for peer support specialists in transitional housing. They're in Josephine County. They work with Welcome Home Oregon, and they would be hiring some or portions of peer support specialists. The time would be divided between a male and a female staff person who would provide gender-specific care and support. This would extend support to persons on local control probation. Then they're also requesting funding for jail staff to allow individuals who are on probation to serve long-term sanction, to serve a long-term sanction in the local jail. Next up is Lane County. They're requesting funding for a batterer intervention program, which, as you all may recall, is something that they currently fund with Justice Reinvestment funds. However, this will be the first time that they are doing that with Spanish language. And so this will be a existing program to a new population, which are predominantly Spanish speakers. And then they were requesting additional funds for cognitive behavioral therapy. Currently, they have CBT on the ground and running. The demands for it are higher than what they have budgeted for it. So they're asking for additional funding to increase the to meet the needs of CPT locally. Multnomah County, they're requesting a data analyst position in their circuit court. This was also a request that they made in their competitive grant that was ultimately not funded. In their application, they note the need for a data analyst specifically based in the circuit courts as part of their overarching McJERP, their Multnomah County Justice Reinvestment Program, and them relying on the data that they collect and interpret. Tillamook County, they're requesting funding for part of the cost of a probation officer that would supervise DUI's caseload. This PO would provide risk needs assessment, make referrals, collect urine analysis, all the kind of things that a PO would do, but with a DUI caseload specifically. They're also requesting additional funds for Brighter Futures program located in the jail. This is a program that is funded currently with JRP funds. As a reminder, this is a program that has jail staff work with adults in custody on interview skills, resume building, work skills, and then if an adult in custody completes the program, they receive a certificate of completion and then a follow-up call after the release to see if they were able to gain employment. Next is GPS monitoring for a pretrial release program. The local circuit court administers their pretrial release program. It's a relatively new program. They've identified a need for additional funding for electronic monitoring. If awarded, electronic monitoring would be, the cost of it would be covered by the grant. And then they feel that they could have 10 released people on a device at any time. And then lastly, they're asking to cover some administrative costs. Umatilla County, they're requesting funding for to cover the cost of part of a position, which is an administrative aid. This individual will provide data collection and financial tracking and provide direct client services within the CARE program. The CARE program is a JRP funded program. It's a full service integration of identified and assessed clients and their families that are moderate to high risk. They use Oregon Health Authority's REAL-D assessment to kind of target the individual to locally available resources that are specific to their unique situation. And so to the extent that there are resources available in rural northeastern Oregon, they are making sure that every individual has those resources available to them through what is essentially an onboarding process to identify what resources they might benefit from. And so this administrative aid would help expand that program. Wasco County, they're requesting some additional funding for transitional housing and peer mentor support. They currently contract with Bridges to Change. The costs of that partnership has recently increased. It was something that actually hadn't increased since 2016. They're expecting a gap in funding of $91,000. They noted in their application that Bridges to Change continues to be at full capacity and graduate approximately one individual per month from the program as it has for the last 7 years. They're also requesting funding for wraparound services and supplies to support justice-involved individuals, as well as crime witnesses to ensure court testimony and address crisis situations. So these kinds of wraparound services could include short-term housing, living supplies, transportation, or collateral costs to getting ID or appropriate paperwork. Next up is Washington County. They're requesting funding for portions of one deputy district attorney for a year. They have identified the importance of prosecutors as part of their justice reinvestment program. Is particularly their downward departure program, and there's a need for additional funding for deputy district attorneys, and so they're looking to fund a portion of one deputy district attorney with this request. And so that is the 12 counties. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm also happy to talk about possible funding options that you might have, but I'll maybe take a breather here. Please, Commissioner Ojiro.
Thank you. I think one of the hardest things for me in looking at this batch of proposals, and it was true in the original round as well, is that there are some counties that really are filling core components of their program, PO officers and deputies and a deputy DA, and others that are really enriching their programs. And it's very, very hard to make decisions between the two. Sure. And the other is that some are serving large populations, and others are serving small populations. And it would really be helpful in future if we had some sense for, the number of people that were going to be served with these services, just to get some sort of calibration for what we're getting. And it's just hard to decide. Of course, I'd want ideally to fund all of them.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful feedback. Thank you. Commissioner Norton, you had your hand up.
I did. I just had but it sounds like, I guess my question for you is, when you look at all of these were all within, there's no like, oh, that's not allowable, that kind of stuff. So it's really at our own discretion here.
Yeah, of the 12 applications, they all met the criteria as outlined by the commission. The only potential, issue is the funding of the Columbia County's request EMDR, simply because the American Psychological Association says it's conditionally recommended. And so the Justice Reinvestment Program funds evidence-based programs. If you all are comfortable with that conditional recommendation, that is the only thing that, which is why I flagged it.
Okay. And my additional request is, and it's kind of to the previous kind of comment, normally we have these red, yellow, green. I know it sounds silly, but the like, do we have any way of knowing which of these counties is maybe best embedding the values of JRI through some kind of mechanism? That way I know it's short term. I'm like, at a loss, and I know it's not, in my opinion, it's not fair to just allocate the amounts equally, because you've got smaller communities, you've got larger communities, but I'm trying to figure out a way that would be equitable instead of equal.
We don't have the triaging tool worked up with current data. So any data that I would be able to show you would be a year old at this point. And counties have changed as a result. I could get you that information at a later date. Obviously, that may not help you today if you need to make the decision today. But if you all don't feel comfortable with the decision today, we could schedule another meeting. I think I'm loath to suggest that, but yeah. If there's no other thoughts or comments, I'll maybe walk through a few possible funding options that you have before you, and then maybe a discussion can get kicked off. So obviously the first option, which Commissioner Norton kind of referred to, is you could, actually the first two are pretty close. You could allocate the maximum amount to each county equally. So just across the board, every one of the 12 counties gets the same amount of money. The second option is to allocate the maximum amount to each county based on their request amount. So because we had different budgets, we know right from the get-go, if you were to do it equally, no one will get their $100,000 budget. And in fact, nobody will get their full $75,000 budget. However, there is one county where if you were to divide it equally, their request does not meet the new, in fact, let me just show you. So here's the maximum available per request on the right. Columbia counties, if you were to divide everybody up and give them an equal amount, their Columbia County's request in the $75,000 budget was for only 55,000, in which case you would award them their full request on that $75,000 budget sheet, and then everybody else would get equal. As you can see here, the difference is not significant. And then the third possible funding is that you could choose amongst the 12 which ones to fund. And if you were to, remove 2 of the requests wholly, that would take care of it. We could fund 10 of them completely. But in terms of the criteria outlined in the solicitation, they all received LipSync approval. They all met the focus on restoration of funds. So you would have to use some other decision mechanism to differentiate them. If anyone would like me to go back slides, maybe to or Commissioner Norton, please.
Yeah, I think this is more of a question for the group. Is there any of these that people feel strongly about? Like, is there people who say, gosh, we don't even want to get into the business of only funding some of the requests? Or does anybody feel strongly about one of these 3 options? Take that as a no.
This is Patty. I don't feel strongly about it. I think this is, if we're going to take the time to break each one of these down to determine line by line what it's going to cost, this is going to be a long meeting.
I think that the easiest solution is that second one that you presented, Ian, taking Columbia's 60 at their 75% level, but and then dividing it up equally aside from that, that 66,292. It's not perfect, that's for sure, but in the absence of having any other criteria in the request for proposals, that and without being able to think about numbers served and scaling by county, it's really difficult to make this decision. We would have to come up with some criteria here on the fly.
Thank you for the comment and thank you for the discussion. I probably should clarify my remarks by saying that all of the counties, by my estimation, met the criteria. Now, there's of course different gradations of meeting the criteria. And so perhaps you all as the grant review committee determined that Trillium County maybe passed the low bar, but they didn't pass the high bar in the requirements placed upon them by the commission. But Director Gowie-Rand.
Hey, thanks, Ian. This is a competitive grant process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does the commission want us to weigh any criteria to make that determination in this process? And I'm asking that because if if the expectation is that we award the grant application to the most competitive and most promising, are we looking at prison utilization decline, going back to the original baseline that we were presented with earlier, or are we looking at the strength of the application in terms of the programs that have been presented? And if we're looking at both of those, which one's more important than the other to make this determination? That's my first thought or question. And then my second follow-up to that is, we're not talking about a lot of money as it relates to, Justice Reinvestment Programming for $40 million. This is only $700 and some thousand. So I'm inclined to make make a recommendation for the sake of time and just efficiency for that second part of the maximum available per request. If we move in that direction, though, I would like to see the commission take more of a stronger stance on the formula piece of things, as opposed to putting us in a position of a competitive grant process that we really don't even know, if I'm being candid, what those parameters might be on what we make the decisions on. If we are going to call this a competitive grant process, and it would be much easier, I think, for all of us, especially those of us in the system that are working, that if it was allocated through the formula grant percentages, that process is much easier, and it doesn't pit counties against each other, because it feels like in this circumstance, in terms of a competitive process, we don't know what we're measured against, right, necessarily. And it just feels like it could be done unfairly if we continue down this path. So
thank you, Director Guyran. In response to your first question, because it is a justice reinvestment program, any request must meet the requirements of the program, which are to reduce prison usage and reduce recidivism. We did include a question that would elicit those responses. Perhaps you all read those responses and determined, Umpqua County did not meet those requirements and therefore would be excluded. Beyond those JRP program requirements, the only narrowing was what the commission here put forward on the focus should be on restoration of funds. The language that they use for the restoration, as you can see, is kind of broad. By my estimation, every request did clear that hurdle. From my role as staff, I often think of these as stage gates, and where counties or requests must clear different hurdles. From my vantage point, all of them cleared the required hurdles, but I could see from a different vantage point where perhaps somebody else may have a disagreement.
I would have to say that I wasn't particularly impressed with the proposals as proposals. Some of them were very, very slim in terms of the information provided, and they did not necessarily address the question about the effect on reducing jail population or prison population very seriously. But they've answered that question before, so I can understand that. Yeah. I think at this point, I'm most comfortable with that variant 2, the maximum available per request, just because we don't have the other data in front of us to make a better decision.
Would you like to make a motion to that extent?
Sure. I will make a motion that we fund these proposals according to the maximum available per request chart as presented by yourself.
I'll second that.
Okay, there is a motion and a second on the table. Is there any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Norton.
Yeah, I think in the future, if we're going to do a supplemental round, I would love to have a little bit more information as well, in terms of some of that gatekeeping that you all do ahead of time, because it probably would have helped my decision, or even, the formula funding, what that would look like. I know we could have all done that our level best, but I think it was in hindsight, it was a little lacking in what they really wanted to see. And I'm saying that as somebody who sits on the Criminal Justice Commission. So I'll take ownership of that. I'll take that conversation back. But yeah, that's all I had to say. It's nothing to do with the motion, but I think I wanted to get that onto the record so that we will remember that in the future.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, if not, oh, please.
Yeah, to the commissioner's point, Ian, this is a question for you, I guess. Because there hasn't been a really robust response on this particular application as we reviewed them, are you sensing a little bit of maybe it's grantee fatigue as it relates to just being able to populate the information, or are we creating too much bureaucratic red tape here for the the amount of money that is being allotted? And I'm wondering if there's some level of frustration or maybe fatigue from people that are applying for these grants.
So I cannot and I will not speak for all grantees, but I will say that I have heard from several grantees indicating that this is a lot of work in their already busy lives and busy work responsibilities. I think you all at the Grant Review Committee were, I'm making some assumptions, but I think part of the reason why you all recommended that the unallocated funds be direct awarded the way that you all recommended was a reflection of that. The commission obviously made a different determination. I, as staff, heard some feedback from that, but it was by no means did I, call up every single county to get a universal sample. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Roseborough?
I think that, yeah, being able to make a direct allocation in the initial round would have been a lot simpler and would have taken a lot less staff time all around, both at the CJC level and in our communities. But this is what we have. And I was going to make another point and I've forgotten. My apologies.
It's been a really good discussion, but if the commission does get that feedback, especially for us grant review committee members, I'd like to know what some of those issues might be, and if we could somehow address that, like we simplify the process in some way, or just make it a little bit less cumbersome, for grantees to actually get the funding and do the work instead of spending so much time in this bureaucracy. I think that would help, get the services to the people that actually need the services, which is the clientele that are in the community. And anyway, that to me, I would hate to discourage counties to apply for these very necessary funds because we're creating this this barrier, of communication and just bureaucracy. So less is more, in other words.
Mhm.
And I feel like we can message that back to the CJC.
And when I do bring whatever ultimately your all's recommendation is to the commission, I will pass along some of those comments. I think I'll rely on Commissioner Norton as well to provide some additional context for serving both on the Grant Review Committee and the commission.
I remembered my previous point, and that is that I really did like the request that the prospective grantees provide the 100%, 75%, and 50% funding levels. That is very useful to see what their priorities are. And we made those educated guesses in the previous round as to how to scale back. This gives those folks a chance to say what their preference is.
That's good feedback to hear. Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay, I guess I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion on the table, please say aye.
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 And there was no opposition there, so the motion passes unanimously. Thank you for that. I will pass it back over to Catherine, who will finish out discussion talking about baselines.
All right, thanks, Ian. Yeah, so like I mentioned, this is sort of the second half of my planned presentation here. There's only about 5 slides here. It's not quite as long, but in addition to the overall prison use plot and baseline that we just chatted about, obviously CJC staff maintain multiple other prison use measures on our JRP dashboard. You all look at most of those during the evaluation of a county's prison use, and they're all somewhat related to the overall prison use page in some way. So it makes a lot of sense for us to update those in some small ways, along with an update to the baseline. So the 3 that we're going to look at is that triaging plot we were just talking about, that helps you all sort of put counties into buckets for evaluation. The intakes and length of stay plots, that are the 2 elements that come together to create our prison use measure. And then also just the different ways that we break out those by JRP crime type. All right, so first, let's take a look at the triage plot. We developed this tool along with you all and for you all as a tool to bucket the counties. As Ian said, this is the most recent triage plot we have, which is about a year old now. So the data have changed quite a bit since this one, but this is just sort of a visual for this part of the discussion. We typically only create and display this during GRC meetings to help bucket and examine county applications during the formula funding discussion. Staff think that this could be really helpful to have updated all the time, as evidenced by our conversation a few minutes ago, right? So we think that this could also be really helpful to folks outside of the GRC. The commission doesn't see this very often, unless it's specifically needed to sort of explain what the GRC has decided or brought to the commission. I think that counties could benefit from seeing this ahead of time and during the application writing process. And so staff really think that this is something that we could benefit from, everyone could benefit from having available on the dashboard and updated monthly. We have heard in the past from you all that this is a useful tool. We just wanted to sort of bring that up again, say, is that still the case? Do we still like this sort of visual format, having the plot like this that has the different quadrants and that allows the bucketing? And then also, and I think I know the answer to this, but do you have any objection to it being displayed all the time on the dashboard year round and have that available, and noting that it would change every month as we got new DOC data in, it would be really frequently updated. Yes, please.
Hey, Catherine, thank you for this. So I really value things like this, these types of plot graphs. I think they're helpful as it relates to comparing counties to the baselines. What I would add to your previous slide is a focus on the positive. In other words, how much does each county save in terms of prison non-utilization, right? How many months do people get sentenced to and then avoid that by staying in the local communities? If we could equate that to dollars, I would really like to see us showing the positive in the justice reinvestment dashboards, as opposed to always like it's a gotcha punitive type of dashboard here. If you're in the red, you're naughty. If you're in the yellow, you're not so naughty. And if you're in the green, you're doing well. But what about the wins? What about all of the cost savings over the course of, since 2013 from justice reinvestment programming that we have yielded in savings to the state? And from my calculations, I think it was from your staff, Ian and Catherine, that justice reinvestment programming has saved several $100 million. Like I want to say it's in the $600 million range. Is that what it is? So really showcasing the success of justice reinvestment programming and breaking it down per county, I think would be really, really helpful. And then you could say, you know, in terms of baseline positivity, make those comparisons like this type of a plot graph of where you're at with the baselines of the savings that you're making, you know, and spin it in a way that's positive. So we can continue to have the momentum and support from counties.
Sure. Yep. Thank you for that.
Kathleen, could I jump in with a follow-up question?
Thanks.
Nate, to that, would you be open to, so the cost avoidance study that you referenced was kind of on a 10-year time scale. Both with the baseline and then the cost avoidance scale, it becomes harder and harder to like manage and estimate the longer it goes on. Would you be supportive of a cost avoidance measure that was a rolling sum, similar to what Catherine talked about for the prison usage measure? So, if it's a 3-year or a 5-year rolling sum, so it's more up-to-date data, because relying on, at this point, going to be 12-year-old data on cost avoidance becomes a little tricky.
Yeah, I really appreciate that that question. So I guess my response would be the original intent of justice reinvestment dollars, the whole reason why 3194 was passed in existence now, is that you had 4 different goals, and we have effectively achieved those different goals. And so to reset the baseline, if you will, on this type of plot graph, I don't know that it's completely representative of the original intent of justice reinvestment, given that particular time frame when it was passed. So I'm still noodling on that right now on how that would look. And then to your question, I'm kind of a visual learner. I'd like to see, I would like to see it, populated in terms of data and then displayed for graph purposes, so I could take a look at it and see what really you're talking about in terms of a proposal. But I guess the philosophy that would be helpful as it relates to this group's work for reviewing grant applications, I would like to see how much cost savings each county yields, and then celebrate those things and talk about them, and to build momentum to continue to do the good work that each county is doing.
Thanks for that, Nate.
I think that Nate makes really good points. Celebrating the positive is a great thing. I think that that's also clearly something that the legislature would probably like to see. It makes it easier for them to then continue to invest when they see the positive outcomes on a regular basis, and will help our programs at the county level. I think there's a utility for both, this graph in particular and the positive one. Because this tells us as reviewers to take a harder look at Clackamas, Jackson, and Polk in particular, and what are the dynamics there, what's going on, because we want to be able to invest appropriately to help them be as successful as the others. So I wouldn't want to get rid of this, but whether to share this on an ongoing basis in public format, I don't know. I don't know how much it changes if we were to update it monthly. What would that look like? So again, I think I'm also with Nate in the sense of wanting to see some of that data before being able to make decisions about it. Yeah, and the other is, again, the gains over time might be really useful. Just looking at this again, Marion and Lane look like they've been very successful in sustaining gains over time. I'm not sure if that's really true because this is a snapshot. And it makes me, again, ask, what have they been doing right? And I know that they are some of the better funded programs. So what are they doing that's over and above get the basics, that is allowing them to get to the results they're getting to. So lots of food for thought.
Yeah,
I would
thank you.
like to
Thank you both.
point out that we are not actually well-funded. And that the costs of doing these programs, our county commissioners have had to backfill with one-time money because we don't have a sustainable source of funding for these programs. And so if the legislature doesn't increase funding for these programs, we will not be able to sustain them when our Board of Commissioners doesn't have one-time money to put toward it any longer.
Point taken. You guys have a much more sophisticated program than some, however. We always look to you.
Well, I appreciate that. And we have had some really great programs. I'm not going to take your time talking about the challenges that our programs are suffering now because of the population and, the pretrial release issues and all of that, and how hard it is to get people into the programs now.
If I may, Catherine, so you were asking for feedback on that rolling average.
Yes.
The rolling 3-year average. I think, just from takeaways on this particular discussion, I don't want to lose the value of the historical value of all the prison cost savings or avoidance that each county has made. And it's almost as if we could keep track of, that historical data. And then when counties have, like in Clackamas County this last time, they had an uptick and we said, no, we're not going to fund you. We're going to put you on probation or whatever we ended up doing. And then they had to come back and present. I'm wondering if we would have had that historical perspective on how much dollars they have actually saved, in terms of an investment, if you will. And then we could have had more of a discussion about the reinvestment, back into the communities just because they had a bad, maybe it was a couple of months or a couple of years or a couple of bad cases that they sent to prison for long periods of time. It would be helpful to know how much they've actually saved the state, over the course of since 3194 was passed. And then say, okay, well, they've saved the state hundreds of millions of dollars. So let's give them a break on this particular one, and invest into them, however much that was for that particular grant cycle. But I just don't want to lose the value of the amount of money over the several years that we've been doing this, and then reestablish the baseline and continue to expect it to go down at the same level of funding that we've always done at 40 million. I think there was one increase at the very beginning, but 40 million each biennium is not enough to sustain these types of programs if we're going to continue to raise the bar, if you will, for reducing prison.
Yes, please, Lisa.
Yeah, and this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I remember coming on to the JRI Grant Review Committee right about the time the governor was saying, hey, this is not a give me program anymore. And I'm wondering if the thoughts have changed because I'm hearing a different feeling, but it's like, at some point we may be faced with not funding people. I think it's just something we need to, I personally would love some clarification. Maybe that's beyond the scope, but, we could fund 8 programs really well or 16 programs okay, and they were running into what we're talking about here, where it's like, well, if that funding, if we hit a hard year and don't have general funds, what happens? So I'm wondering if what that looks like or how it would look different. And I know that's not popular to say, hey, maybe we need to not be funding programs, but it seems like we're at that point. I don't know. I just need to put that out there. Has nothing to do with your beautiful graphs, because I love your graphs. I think there's a way to historically capture that data over time. I think, you know, that would be nice. To Nate's point, I think it's just a matter of like how we present that data, but also what was our charge? You know, what was the charge of the JRI? So.
Thank you, all of you, for that feedback. That was great discussion. There are a couple of other pieces that we frequently look at that I would like to walk through as well. Right quick before we move on to the next slide, I think that what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is there's a little bit of a hesitancy to put this particular plot front and center on the dashboard before we see what it might look like more clearly with updated data, and what it might look like month over month for it to be changing. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Thank you. That's good feedback.
I think it's, but I would just, I will say this information is helpful. But like you had said, it's not telling the entire story. There's other information that, you know, we would want considered as all. But yeah, I really appreciate the graph and the effort that you put in on this.
Thank you very much. Yes, Lisa.
I'm just wondering if you've talked to the folks that administer this program, like in the counties, again, not trying to burden them, but like what they would like to see also, and how they would like, you know, what would the story look like if they told it from their perspective? You know, I know that we had, and maybe there's not room on the graphs, but we get a lot of testimonials that are important to highlight, you know. I just wonder what that would look like, or if we could make space for that, or if we've talked to the counties about what information they would like to see displayed as well to make it more useful for all of us.
That is a wonderful point. We are going to speak with them. You are the first group that we've brought this to and started to open up this discussion with, but we're absolutely going to bring it to the counties and multiple other folks who frequently use this. And so we're hoping that they have things that they're willing to share that they would like to be included here as well. Absolutely.
Figured you had to ask a question.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Ian. So this is another page that probably looks fairly familiar to you all, but it is not the most front-facing page in our dashboard. So you can navigate to this, but it's a little bit hidden at this point. So this is really sort of like the backside of our sentencing page. It has this histogram on the right-hand side that shows the distribution of sentence lengths for either initial sentence or probation revocation sentence length, depending on how you select it, and then for a particular crime type. So like this example is for initial sentences for property crimes with one particular county compared to the statewide average for sentence lengths. And then on the left-hand side, for that same selection, it is the row level data for that particular county. And so I think this has proven to be pretty helpful to you all in assessing sentence lengths as a piece of prison usage. This right-hand plot we've used a lot. And on the left-hand side, this is really helpful to counties. And so I think this page is pretty interesting because it has these two different elements that we have seen a lot of use of, but they're not front-facing. So that's the big drawback to this page. And Ian, if you could click to the next one. This is the actual front-facing sentencing page, but you can't get to what we were just talking about unless you click on one of these bars. And so that sort of drills it down to that, whether it's initial sentence or probation revocation, and then which crime type you're looking at. And that is the main way that we use these bars, really, as sort of a button to move into that sort of more detailed information. And so one of the things we have been thinking about updating is sort of improving this overall sentencing page by placing more focus on the histogram and then the histogram there, and then the sentencing trends plots on the right-hand side that we frequently show you all during prison use evaluation, and less emphasis on this bar structure while still allowing people to click something to drill down to those low-level data. So that was maybe a bit of a complicated way of saying we want to take most of these minus these histogram, this bar here, and sort of make them more accessible and more front-facing. And we think that might be helpful. But before we sort of like rearrange all of these things that we pretty frequently present to you all, and I think that the counties frequently use, we just wanted to open it up to, are there pieces of this front-facing page or the sort of deeper page that we just looked at that you particularly like or you think are important, or are there pieces that maybe you're okay with this bar piece here that takes up a whole lot of space being a lot smaller or less prominent. And also, you can click back and forth between the slides, I believe, on your own if you wanted to look at any of these pages out of order of what we're showing. Yes, Nate, please.
So as I'm looking at these graphs, I'm trying to remember the goals of justice reinvestment programming. And correct me if I'm wrong, but a couple of years ago, we added an additional goal to culturally responsive programming or racial parity, something to that effect.
It is not a goal in statute. It is something that has been included in solicitations. So it is important, but it is not a co-equal goal as of yet. If the legislature chooses to, they could, of course, incorporate that, but it is not currently.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. As it relates to being a goal, but not as important to the other goals, I'm wondering if we can break down some of these graphs to drill down into the information of the demographics, including gender. And so that's really important, I know, to a lot of people, especially Oregon Association of Community Corrections Directors, to get to racial parity. And we want to know what we're doing for prison utilization. And that's on the punitive response of things. But as it relates to justice reinvestment programming, I want to know if we are being fair and impartial to people that we're offering to stay in the community. And those things are really important to me in terms of incentivizing programs, like, say, for example, you have housing, or you have treatment that we're helping with, or you have any number of different services that justice reinvestment programming is funding. Are we applying those incentives and those positive things to all people? And are we yielding parity as opposed to disparity within those populations?
So we don't have that tool really shown right now, but that is the main purpose of our racial disparity tool that we developed not too long ago, is to look at least the opportunity to stay in community or receive a probation sentence as opposed to prison. And so that's our one piece that we do have available, and we do keep updated. We just don't have it in this presentation as part of sort of this discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Catherine, I just wanted to say that I agree with you that this particular bar chart on this slide 32 is not particularly illuminating, because the same information is in the graphs to the right. And I would much prefer to have the histogram as well. And then, if you double click from there, you can go and see that in actual numbers. I have to confess that I use this page, but not often enough to remember how to use it. And it's very complex. I'll often realize that I can actually get more information by clicking through. So In general, I think that your data is vastly underutilized, and it's a not well-known resource, and I would love to see more promotion of all of the resources that you have.
Thank you. That's definitely a piece of why we would like to simplify this as well, because I think that a lot of times it's too difficult for folks to kind of come in here, explore, and find their way to that histogram through these bars. So we don't want to make it that difficult for folks to get to those anymore.
And I would just echo, I mean, if there's a way of like a pop-up menu or whatever, click here, and there probably is. I use it when it comes time to read this stuff, but even like I lose, it sounds hilarious, but I lose valuable seconds when I go down and see like percentage of total LOS. Like it takes me a minute or two, like, oh yeah, length of sentence, but then you're already on to, you know. So I think it would be helpful to have a little bit more bracketing, a little bit more contextualizing in this. Yeah, I am a huge fan of generative AI. I would love to see us employ a chatbot or something that's like, what do you want to look at? And I don't know how useful that is, but at some point, you know, how do we make this user friendly so we can direct people to this page so that people are getting the positive stories, that kind of thing.
That's great feedback. We certainly have the capability to put a little bit more explanation in here and make things a little bit more accessible.
In addition, I'm sorry, in addition to that, also, like, why does it matter? What's the so what, right? If I'm looking at this, what am I supposed to get out of it?
All right. So I think we have we have more time if folks would like to go back and look at any of those slides and talk in more detail. But if not, I know this was felt a little bit like a crash course in all the things we're thinking about updating. So please, if you have a minute to go back and look at those, look through this PowerPoint again, or go directly to the dashboard and click through. And if there are things that you really like, really don't like, any other feedback, let any of the three of us know. We're actively working on this every week. We're meeting and talking about how to make this better and incorporate your all's feedback. So we would appreciate any more information that you guys want to share with us about what's useful to you. And I'll pass it back to Ian.
Thanks, Catherine. Just to conclude, I do want to reiterate something that Catherine said, which is that this is the beginning of a lengthy conversation we're going to be having with different constituencies. Thank you, first of all, for you all speaking to how you use this tool, the weaknesses of the tool, the way the tools could be improved. We're going to have similar conversations with up next is the LIPSIC coordinators, but then we'll be talking to those core grantees, community corrections, a lot of different constituencies. So we will then incorporate all of the feedback, perhaps contradictory feedback, and then put together some different mock-ups of what this could look like. We are committed to doing this right, not doing it quickly. So while we tentatively would love to have something, you know, by the 1st of next year to unveil publicly, we're focused on making sure that what is ultimately created is the right product. And so we're not holding ourselves to any kind of deadline for that. And so, which is why we want to iterate. So we will almost certainly come back to you all to continue this discussion, gain your feedback on whatever we happen to mock up as an initial reaction. But yeah, I guess I just wanted to publicly state that we're committed to incorporating and acknowledging feedback to make sure that this tool, however it is created or shaped, is ultimately useful to these different groups as it measures prison usage for the Justice Reinvestment Program. And then, you know, we have other dashboards, and we are continuing to work on those for either racial disparity, recidivism, and a whole host of other things. This is just a narrow focus on the prison usage, but we're excited to keep working with you, I guess, is how I'll conclude. Nate?
Has there been any talk or discussion about the actual cost per day per person that that it takes to keep people in the community versus sending
Mm.
them to prison, which is the $175 per day, and then just making that comparison county to county on what that looks like in terms of the value that we get for keeping people in the local communities.
I'm not familiar with that particular cost. I would assume that you might be better situated to answer that with DOC cost studies in the past on like a daily rate, but I would not know.
Yeah, we have the capitated rate and we have the daily rates for the high, medium, and low risks, but those are in addition to the programs that we get for, that are funded through the JRP. And it would be really good to know how much it costs per person to keep somebody in the community. And this is going back to, I think, several other applications ago, but I remember one of the counties had just a few people that were being served, to
Mhm.
keep them in the community, but it was at a very significant cost. And so it's like, well, why wouldn't you just send them to prison at the $175 rate and save that money? And vice versa. There's other arguments the other direction as well. So I just want to keep the momentum going for justice reinvestment, that you can populate that information onto a graph saying that this is the value that we're yielding based off of the investment that you're making local communities. And maybe the message from the state is, yes, we recognize the $600 million that you've saved us local communities, and we want to reinvest that back into you. So
Mhm.
anyway, that's I think would be helpful for the messaging to continue the momentum.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that is something that we have kicked around internally, is how to measure that. One of the challenges we have is that we don't have a great measure of who is directly served by justice reinvestment. The closest approximation we have is looking at conviction level data, saying, okay, if somebody sends for a JRP crime that is presumptive prison, how many of them get either a local control sentence or a probation sentence, and using that as a precise proxy for their JRP client, when we know that that number is likely much smaller. And so, if you give me better data, absolutely, I will 100% jump into that lake with you. It is right now a limitation that we have, but yeah, we have used some of that imprecise proxy data in the past, and I imagine we will continue to do that. We might not just bring it to the fore because we're not as confident in the data.
That makes sense. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time. Thank you for all the time, both in this meeting and then prior to this meeting. I know these kinds of committees are often thankless jobs, so thank you for doing it. Okay, have a good day, everyone.